Hello and welcome. I am Jack Hanbury, patron of the Ruperra Castle Preservation Trust on this open door day. I'm pleased you're joining us for a walk on the paths that wend their way around the outskirts of the castle and its gardens. During the walk you will see and hear about the castle's history and that of the Morgan family, ancestors of the Lords of Tredegar who built it. You will learn about some of the dramatic incidents that took place here and how the castle has touched the lives of people in the area and beyond.
Hello, I'm Dr. Elaine Davey, and I'm hoping to show you over the next 10 minutes or so just why this castle is so important, why we fought for decades to get it to have the future it needs, because it's strategically important where it's placed, but most important, it's got this fascinating history which I'm sure you'll love, and I'll explain all about as we go around the site. 2009 there was a planning inquiry when the previous owner had put in for a very inappropriate housing development, and our barrister wrote this site ought to be one of the most protected in Wales, comprising as it does a scheduled ancient monument, Grade 2 star listed castle, Grade 2 listed outbuildings and glasshouse, and Grade 2 registered historic park and garden, set within a conservation area, a visually important local landscape, site of special scientific interest, and a site of importance for nature conservation. So that's the first thing. The layers of designation are enormous and meant to protect it, but nevertheless we're still having to fight to give it the future it should have. Ruperra is a house of great historical importance as the seat of a man who played a prominent role in one of the great aristocratic households of the late Tudor Jacobean period in Wales and in England. The castle and surrounding landscape have a unique significance in the social history of Wales. Sir Thomas Morgan, its builder, was steward to the second Earl of Pembroke, Henry Herbert, who was Lord of Cardiff, President of Wales, and restored, in inverted commas, Cardiff Castle. He added the apartments and things and included building the Herbert Tower. Thomas Morgan was also steward to the third Earl of Pembroke. The Herberts, that is the Pembrokes, who were sometimes called the Earls of Paradise, had their household at Wilton. Henry VIII had gifted the abbey and a 50,000-acre estate to William Herbert, the first Earl of Pembroke, in that creation. William built a large Tudor mansion there. It became a notable centre of Renaissance culture, and it was where Thomas Morgan, as surveyor to the wood, was knighted by James I in 1623. The accession of the Tudors had brought great benefit to the Welsh landed classes. This continued with the Stuarts. The Tudors showed great favour to their countrymen, who flocked to the court and received preferment in the church and in government on an unprecedented scale. Sir Thomas Morgan decided that his new status required a new residence at the Ruperra estate, which had passed to him on his marriage to Mary Lewis. Many of Morgan's duties involved representing the Earl, making him one of the most powerful men in Wales. Morgan must have been influenced by the grandeur of the properties that he visited and by the sophisticated court culture centred on Wilton. This embraced Renaissance fashion whilst nostalgically celebrating the feudal past. The Earls of Pembroke were central to the ideal of the English Arcadia, an imagined world of unapproachable bliss and beauty that set its face against the forces of modernity as the feudalism of the Middle Ages gave way to mercantile capitalism and the Renaissance sweeping out of Italy. Sir Philip Sidney, brother of Mary Sidney, was the third wife to Henry Herbert, who wrote Arcadia. They were trying to hang on to this nostalgic feudal past because it meant it maintained their status quo as the forces of modernity and trade were sweeping in, as well as the ideas of the Renaissance. So that's the context of this castle, apart from Thomas Morgan's aggrandisement. Ruperra castle is also of great historical importance for being a rare example of an unusual, innovative and spectacular example of an early Jacobean Renaissance sham, sometimes called toy, sometimes pageant castle, of great sophistication for its date and location. This is because castles actually are defensive. They're meant to be fortresses. These were never meant to be fortresses. I mean, they're made of brickwork, they couldn't withstand an attack. But the whole point is they were background to the masques that were part of that celebration of the nostalgic past. These sorts of houses were often built as lodges, isolated in parks as we are here, of symmetrical design as we will see, with the upper stories used as a belvedere, which is Italian for beautiful view, which we also have here looking out over the Severn Estuary and looking over their parkland. The original building had a pitched roof and gabled dormers. A sketch of the house by Thomas Dyneley, who was amanuensis to the Duke of Beaufort, Lord Herbert of Raglan, of 1684, was made when Duke of Beaufort was progressing through Glamorgan as Lord President of Wales. This shows the south front to the castle approached by a flight of steps, through a gatehouse of fashionable twinned lodges, axial courts, and a magnificent flight of steps aligned on the front entrance with a raised terrace to this elevation. This formal hierarchical approach is typical of Grand Tudor and Jacobean homes. Only the corner towers have battlements at this stage. The number of windows is notable too, indicating that the design is outward looking, not inward looking, set around a courtyard as in the Tudor part of Tredegar House. The houses of the Welsh gentry in Wales at this time were, to all intents and purposes, late medieval, semi-fortified manor houses. The floor plans are also different in that Renaissance style. They indicate a rational analysis of the functional requirements of rooms, and they were proportioned rooms with a centralised system of circulation. These design innovations increased privacy and comfort. The square plan form too is interesting, with flanking circles at each corner. This demonstrates the Elizabethan and Jacobean fascination with geometrical form. There's a whole literature on the meaning of these, this symbolism encoded in these buildings. This cube form, strengthened by corner towers, was a favourite of high officials. Compare it to Lulworth Castle of 1608, which is so similar in design they could be twin castles. The elevation demonstrates the Arcadian nostalgia for the feudal past of knights, chivalry and defensive castles. Tournaments were held annually on the accession days of Elizabeth I, James I and Charles I. Inigo Jones designed backdrops for court masques that also inspired pageantry. This level of sophistication was enjoyed by very few in Wales at the time. Sir Thomas Morgan would have known of the grand gardens of his contemporaries, such as Robert Cecil's house at Hatfield. He was another of the Welsh new rich. Sir Francis Willoughby of Wollerton, and the Herberts, who were also originally Welsh, at Wilton, of course.
Constantine Huygens, the Dutch ambassador, was on a diplomatic visit to Lord Protector Cromwell in 1652. He arranged for his son Lodewijke Huygens to accompany him and to visit many of the beautiful great houses of Britain, including Ruperra. This is an extract from Lodewijke's journal, that is his diary, for Saturday, April 25th, 1652.
Around noon we reached the very beautiful Ruperra house. The mansion is square with a round tower on each corner, which adds a closet to almost every room. There is a large and lovely hall to the right of the entrance and a number of other fine rooms. Behind the house are many stables. There is a very fine garden on the right with very attractive parterres and walks, and another garden with a large number of fruit trees laid out on the slope of a hill, which one climbs gradually by 6 or 8 steps at a time upon reaching the highest step, One would never guess how charming the view is toward the Severn Crossing, this very beautiful and fertile valley. Behind this garden on the summit of the hill is a wood of full-grown trees, where it is also very pleasant, as in the view from the other side of this wood over the other valleys. When we had dined here with Mr. Chapman, who is the manager of the captain's properties in these parts, we went to see the park, which also belongs to this house. It is not very large, at least compared with another park which we passed that morning, which is 8 or 10 miles all around, but it is full of trees and more than 100 deer. It is partly surrounded by a thick wall and partly by a wooden palisade.
The integrity of the visual and historic setting is more or less intact. To the west is the relic 17th century deer park that would have had impressive avenues and planting, and of greater significance are the lights, or what they call the alley, in the woodland to the north. These allowed anybody walking along the hillside to the motte at the top to have fine views of the castle, its gardens and views out. So this is all part of a very sophisticated design landscape, and these are most unusual in Britain, let alone in Wales. Ruperra Castle was of such grandeur that Charles I stayed here for 4 nights in 1645. He graciously allowed his host, Thomas Morgan, grandson to Sir Thomas, to add the royal coat of arms to the south porch to record the occasion. Heraldry had become important to express pride in pedigree. Meanwhile, after Thomas Morgan's death in 1655, the estate had passed to his sister Elizabeth. She was married to Edmund Thomas of Wenvoe. So at this stage, Ruperra Castle becomes secondary residence to Wenvoe Castle, and later still to Kevin Mably through the marriage of William Thomas, the son, her widow, the widow of William Thomas, to Sir Charles Kemys. It was Sir Charles who entertained the Duke of Beaufort at Ruperra in 1684 for his progress through Wales. In 1704, Ruperra Castle was sold to John Morgan, a younger son of the Macon and Tregear family. It passed through the family then, and in 1763 the two estates of Ruperra and Tregear were united again. There was a fire in 1785, after which the castle was rebuilt. J.P. Neal's etching of 1820 shows the castle as restored by Thomas Hardwick Jr., with the gables replaced by battlements, but overall it is still largely the original Renaissance house. The Morgan line failed in 1792, and the entire estate passed to Jane Gould, whose husband Charles inherited after agreeing to change his name to Morgan by royal licence. Tregear House became the main seat, and the castle became the home of the next in line. This meant it became Colonel Frederick Morgan's home in the mid-1800s. New lodges, the brew house, laundry, dairy range and stables had been built in the first half of the 1800s, but the buildings were rather neglected, and there was a fire in the stable block in 1895. Upon Frederick's death in 1909, the castle passed to his son, Commander Courtney Morgan. Courtney embarked on a programme of refurbishment after inheriting the estate. That included a new east entrance porch, new stables, a new powerhouse, and the magnificent Mackenzie on Moncur glasshouse, one of the largest and finest in Wales. It is the Rolls Royce of glasshouses. There's a wonderful one in the Royal Botanic Garden, Edinburgh, and Sefton Park Palmhouse, Liverpool. It was the centrepiece of a glorious formal Edwardian gardens, looked after by a team of gardeners led by Angus MacKinnon. Commander Courtney moved to Tregear House after his brother Godfrey, Viscount Tregear, died in 1913, and he inherited the whole Tregear estate. Courtney died in 1934. His son and heir, Evan Morgan, had little interest in the site and went off to France and London. So Ruperra Castle was put up for sale in 1935, but no buyer could be found. The house was emptied and the contents were sold or moved to Tregear House or to the London residences.
Restoration of the woodlands around Ruperra Castle has been a successful 21st century rescue mission. Described just over 100 years ago by the Forestry Commission for Wales as ancient woodland, it should have been a precious gem, a relic from our pre-industrial heritage. It deserved every effort to preserve it and its unique and rich ecosystem for future generations. Sadly, this was not to be. Post-World War I, there was a desperate national need to replenish stocks of timber used in the war effort. In 1921, Lord Courtney Morgan, the current owner of the castle, and at that time President of the Forestry Commission, was obliged by the government of the day to plant quick-growing conifers all over Coed Craig Ruperra. In the process, a rich, ecologically diverse habitat was sacrificed at a stroke. No longer sunlit forest glades with myriads of wildflowers, but instead a gloomy coniferous monoculture, unable to support the wildlife whose home it had been since the end of the Ice Age. A more encouraging chapter began in the year 2000, when Ruperra Conservation Trust managed to raise funds and purchase the woodlands. This was a time of increasing public concern about ecological damage and what had been lost. Many could also see the ever-present threat to the countryside from the seemingly unstoppable demands of modern economic development. Ruperra Conservation Trust began a hugely ambitious task to cut down and clear the conifers. Timber was sold to help fund replanting of native deciduous trees in their place. Miraculously, flowers returned. Buried in the soil, seeds and bulbs survived. Once again, springtime in Ruperra now sees a succession of snowdrops, wild daffodils and bluebells. In summer, swathes of foxgloves and willowherb cover the slopes. With recovering native flora, the fauna that once would have found homes in the original ancient woodland has now reappeared. Of course, full restoration of ancient woodlands takes many, many years. It takes the efforts of people dedicated and determined to ensure nature has every possible opportunity to recover. This wonderful countryside is now open to everyone to enjoy. There are good accessible paths, some relatively flat and others more challenging. There are routes to suit walkers, cyclists and horse riders. Now more than ever there is a need for us to escape the pressures of modern life by experiencing the natural world. We know it brings both physical and mental health benefits. We also believe these benefits amply justify our efforts to do our best to restore as much as we can of all that has been lost.
I'm Pat Jones-Jenkins. I've been involved with Ruperra Castle and the history for about 25 years and find it absolutely fascinating. Today we're going to talk about the Coed Craig Ruperra, which is the woodland to the north of the castle. Do you believe in the spirits of place? Our Open Doors Day Heritage Walk usually takes our visitors to view Ruperra Castle itself. But it's now in ruins, resting, but relaxed, in a place in the landscape. For many, this is an emotional experience. Even touching the gate posts can make you want to connect with the past. We crave to know more about the building and the people who lived there. Over the centuries, mankind linked a particular place in its landscape, sometimes in a religious or spiritual way. In more modern times, we have come to feel an atmospheric experience. Can we feel the spirit of place? After hearing about the castle and the family, there is often an urge to climb up to the top of Coed Craig Ruperra. Here the spirit of place, I think, is very strong. Near the top of the hill, we are walking on the top of some of the Iron Age banks and ditches, which once protected the ancient hill from unwelcome visitors. The Silurian people probably lived here from about 500 BC onwards. They could light a beacon on their hill fort to alert their relations on Tumbalum Hill Fort, just north of Risca. They were very strong people, with swarthy faces and dark curly hair. Since neither hill fort has been excavated, we don't really know if there were huts for them there to live in. After the Roman invasion in AD 43, the powerful and warlike Silurian tribes supported the charismatic hero Caractacus, who held the whole of South Wales against the Romans before his final and very famous defeat in 51 AD. Tacitus, the Roman historian, claimed that the continued and determined resistance in the long Silurian War needed the presence of a whole Roman legion in southeast Wales, and this affected the strength of the Romans in the whole of Britain. Eventually, of course, as the result of settled Roman rule, Adventa Silorum, Caer went, the name of Gwent was born. Then, when the Romans had left and small Welsh kingdoms were being set up, grants of land for Christian monasteries were being granted. One king, Cradoch of Reich Bras, Caradog of the strong arm, was one of these. He celebrated not only the name of the ancient hero Caractacus, long since gone, but also he was claimed by the Lewises of Ruperra to be their ancient ancestor. It is almost as though David ap Gwilym, one of Wales's greatest poets, was commissioned to write of Feren y Llwyn, the woodland mass, 4 Coed Craig Ruperra. His patron was Ivor Hael of Baselig and Tredigga, a 14th century ancestor of the Morgans of Ruperra. Here is the poem which describes experiencing a religious ceremony in the woods.
Lle digrif y bîm heddiw dan fentyll y gwyrdd gill gwyw yn gwarando ddechrau dydd y ceiliog bronfraith celfydd yn canu englyn Alythyr, arwyddion a llithion llathyr. Ac eos gain fain fan gaw o gwr y llwyn gareu llaw clerw rai gnant, I gant a gan cloch aberth, clai I chwiban, a dyrchafel yr aberth hyd yn enwch ben y berth, a chrefydd i'n dofydd dad a cherygl nwyf a chariad. Bodlo nwyf i'r ganiadaeth, bedw lwyn o'r coed mwyn a'i maith. A pleasant place I was at today under mantles of the worthy green hazel, listening at day's beginning to the skilful cockthrush singing a splendid stanza of fluent signs and symbols. Then the slim, eloquent nightingale from the corner of a grove nearby, poetess of the valley, sings to the many the sanctus bell in lively whistling. The sacrifice is raised up to the sky above the bush, devotion to God the Father, the chalice of ecstasy and love. The psalmody contents me. It was bred of a birch grove in the sweet woods.
About AD 1200, a mound of earth was thrown up in the middle of the ancient hill fort at Ruperra, with a wooden palisade around it for protection. A superb lookout place for the Welsh to watch if the Normans were coming, or for the Normans to stop the Welsh attacking them. Nobody really knows who built it, but it was probably the Normans. These mounds are called Mott and Bailey castles, and some of them were eventually built in stone. However, the Normans eventually lost interest in the Mott at Ruperra because in 1268 they were building Caerphilly Castle. The Lewis family, meanwhile, were living happily in a mansion house where Ruperra Castle is now. One of Gwilym Lewis's children was Cadogan, who is said to have loved the Mott and built himself a tower there, called by his name for a long time afterwards. Cadogan certainly felt the spirit of place. Was it Cadogan's erect skeleton that was found in the 2-metre square room in the mound when the Morgan family were digging the foundations for a summer house in 1762. Other summer houses were built later on, but have disappeared. This picture shows the last one in 1920 with the head gardener's wife and son who lost his arm in World War I. Soldiers used this summer house in World War II. They would go up there on their time off. Its walls are still there, and so are, of course, the magnificent views.
Well, we've had a stiff walk up on the footpath that comes through Croyd Craig, Ruperra, and we've reached the top, the motte. And what wonderful views await us here. We can see right over the channel. I mean, this was a place that we used for over the years for people to come and enjoy the views and have a good walk in the countryside as well. But from this point you can see all three counties. We're now focused on Cardiff, but if you look further to your left you will be looking at Newport, and then swinging round to the north and to the west is Caerphilly and Caerphilly Mountain. They are the most stupendous views from here. So to recap, the castle retains its distinctive shape, this notable early Renaissance design. Although when built in 1626 it had a pitched roof and gable dormers with mock battlements on its towers. After the first fire in 1785 it was rebuilt on the same pattern but with the gables replaced by battlements. Ruperra Castle was requisitioned by the War Office during World War II, and a succession of troops were billeted there, and even German prisoners of war. The Trust has a substantial oral record of this period of time, including very happy memories of those stationed there and the local community that welcomed them. One recruit training at Ruperra wrote,
Lance Robinson, 22 Yeoman Street, North Shields, North Tyneside. Dear Sir, I am very sorry to see that the castle has been left to neglect, as I used to love to look around it and the surrounding area. The locals were very nice people and I liked the club. Ruperra had been really something for someone like me to see. We'd seen castles before, we've got a lot of castles up here on Tyneside, you know, but this was really beautiful. And I've never forgotten the chandelier. The surroundings were so nice, the gardens and the trees. I enjoyed it there. And I'm sorry for those who never had the chance to see it as it was.
And local families recall happy times. Howell Williams was a young boy living on a farm nearby. One of the non-commissioned officers was billeted with his family. He recalls his thoughts at the time.
I can't remember much about the first resident in Gwen, but I knew that it was very important that you didn't go to their side of the house. They took the front room, the hall, main stairs and the bedroom facing the yard. And I recall a baker from away being an NCO in charge of the training. He stayed some 12 months, and when his replacement arrived, he was married. His welcome company from my mother. The new NCO trainer from Leeds, and they quickly became known as Auntie Ellen and Uncle Albert, and they stayed some 2 years. He was always off walking to the castle where the soldiers were billeted mainly then in the new block of huts on the west side of the castle. And I can remember the offices, the kitchen and laundry were occupied by the hierarchy more or less.
Amongst those being trained at Ruperra were British troops and the bakers who manned field kitchens to cater for troops outdoors. Also stationed at Ruperra were Indian muleteers and the Indian officer who commanded them. They were trained to support the army by hauling ammunition and other goods over mountainous terrain.
Hi, my name is Shalini Gnanasubramanian, and the song I'm going to be singing today is a tribute to the Indian soldiers who fought the World War and were based here at Ruperra. It's a song that's probably the kind of song that the soldiers would have thought of when, reminding them about their homes, their families. It's also a song which is a reminder for all of us to never forget the sacrifices that have been made by the soldiers, by the armed forces. Many of them who've lost their lives never to return back homes. Many of them lost their youth fighting for the motherland. So it's definitely a reminder for us all to remember them.
In December 1941, there was a horrendous fire caused by an overload on the electrical system which gutted the castle. After the fire, the troops had to move to other buildings on the estate, but training continued. Sometime after the war ended, the castle and remains of its estate were sold, and since then has changed hands several times. Apart from one of the outbuildings, the rest of the structures at Ruperra and its grounds have been locked up and left to decay ever since. In 1981, the southeast tower collapsed. In 1986, Caerphilly County Borough Council recommended that the Secretary of State be invited to take Ruperra Castle into guardianship. This is from the conclusion by Elizabeth Whittle, Parks and Gardens Officer for Cadw, to the planning inquiry of April 2009. The garden and castle reflect an age of cultural innovation participated in by only a handful of Welshmen. Sir Thomas Morgan's legacy is of great value and should be protected. I hope, with having seen this history and the beautiful setting of this important castle, this important Renaissance pageant castle, that you agree with us that it should be saved.
Ruperra is a very special place. It's a special castle and it's in a very special landscape. And that's been recognised by its designation, the castle itself, as a Grade 2 star listed building and a Scheduled Ancient Monument. And many of the buildings within its estate are Grade 2 listed. It is set in a conservation area, so those buildings are the focal point of a conservation area. And it's also set in a magnificent local setting, so a registered park and garden. And that recognition is part of its significance. Significance in heritage terms is a question of, first of all, the evidence of what it is already, has it been recognised? Secondly, its history. Thirdly, archaeological remains. And fourthly, its communal value. So I've talked about the designations, that is recognition. It's also set in it's a special landscape area, so again its landscape, its wider setting has been acknowledged. And in terms of the history, over the last 400 years almost, the Morgan family, the Lords Tredegar, have been very much connected with Ruperra. In fact, it was, as we will have heard, Sir Thomas Morgan who first built this very special castle in 1626. And their connection is very important. They were an important family, but of course so are the connections more locally with other families. And because there's that rich history, and of course it stretches back beyond 400 years ago, that historical record can be dug out and actually researched by future generations, we hope. And the archaeological record, we've only just really touched the surface in terms of the archaeology that's there, the layers of history. And then in terms of its communal value, it's very much part of this area's cultural history. Many of the families here had ancestors who worked on the estate, and it's actually had very interesting history. So that makes it something which makes it really special, and something that we should be looking to hand on to future generations.
We've had a lot of support at the events we've held. This photo shows the turnout at Ruperra Home Farm when we launched the book Serving Under Ruperra, about the many local people who were employed there up to the 1930s. And across the region, people are inspired about how Ruperra could be adapted to benefit the whole community.
This is the allotment site, which was started in 2015, and it actually started off just as a little plot for pollinators because it belonged to Friends of the Earth Caerphilly, and we had this thing then about putting pollinators in. And then we realised with all the ground, well, let's do something else. So we moved forward, and with the park keeper's consent and blessing, we decided then to turn it into a community allotment for the community. Well, we do have volunteers from Cwmrymni, and it alternates from having about 10 to 15 other pupils. I believe they're from the special unit, but believe it or not, they've made paths, collected wood chippings, they've done painting, they did the painting of the porter cabin, they do the full range of gardening experiences, and like I say, we found them invaluable. So we could have, with our own volunteers, we could have about possibly 25, 30. Does vary, mind. It's not set in stone. Formerly, this particular site was head high in brambles, and although it was part of the park, and Simon had set it aside for community use, the first thing when he got his workmen to trim all the site, and then we could see the potential. And so we have people who are perhaps of low on confidence. They might have learning problems, they might have mental health issues, they might be just retired people who just enjoy hard work. And we have a full range of people, and we've even had pupils from Cwmrymni, and some of them, there was one little girl who didn't communicate, and she just used to sit in the seating area and wouldn't speak, and then gradually she started to water, and the teacher was amazed, the parents were amazed, she was actually joining in. So I feel a lot of people have got a lot of health benefit, and we're very easygoing, we're always up for a laugh and enjoying ourselves.
Well, I volunteer twice a week. It's on Mondays 10 till 12, on Fridays 10 till 12. I do gardening, I do digging, we're building a butterfly garden at the moment, and I've also worked in the pond area. And the chairman's thinking of doing like a place for people to come for their mental health problems. So it's a range of things really. I get happiness and I get good camaraderie between the other workers. Also it's a feeling of positivity and upliftment that we can actually contribute to society and a community project like this. It's changed from being just meadowland into a lovely up and running veg growing and flowers and oh, it's wonderful.
I'm the ex-deputy head of Rhodri Primary School, and there, one of my roles, I just loved wildlife gardening, conservation, anything to do with the history of the area, and the national curriculum mentioned that we could study the local area, and I'd always wanted to do a visit to Ruperra Castle. Unfortunately, found out it was under private ownership, and I thought, well, I don't really like doing history, just book-based. We like to go on site, and the children would love that too. But when your fortune smiled, because one of the parents, one of the ex-owners of the Ruperra Castle site and castle, said, "How would you like to bring a class to Ruperra before we move on?" And this was before the previous, not this owner now, the one before it. So that's what we did, and I didn't say anything about the castle at all. Took the children aside and said, "You were detectives. You were going to see how much you can pick up about this site by just looking and studying anything." So one little boy said, "Oh, it's a castle, but it's not a castle. There's no moat. It's not really strategically placed if there are any enemies." And I think gradually it dawned on them that it wasn't really, it was like a mock castle, but it was a residence. And we were able at that time, we were able to go into part of the castle, and we were able to look at the different areas and try and work out, this could be a living room, or this could be, and by doing that, the children came back and they had a little bit of background, not entirely accurate mind, but could come back and then do some research from secondary sources. And I always remember on the first moment of that visit, coming to the site on a beautiful spring day, my first reaction was, wow, fantastic. And yes, I think the children felt like that as well.
Well, during my GCSE year, I went on a field trip to Ruperra Castle, and I decided to base my GCSE artwork on Ruperra Castle, predominantly, and I won a competition, and basically I was making a mid-collage of all different bits and pieces, like William Morris-esque sort of material, and photos of the Ruperra Castle, and I found it, the idea of my artwork was to preserve using what we have. I'd like the Ruperra Castle itself to be restored to its former beauty and grandeur. I think it would be wonderful if you had it, like say, the Tree House, where people can enjoy the heritage and the history and be inspired by it's one of a kind beauty.
What I would do, the kitchen garden definitely restore, and probably what I would do is. You've got so many different things you can grow, herbs for example, the different pollinators, you could have a different section for different sort of plant species. I'd probably, if I had my own way, I'd open up as a horticultural training centre. If you're looking, if the current owners are looking for a sort of a commercial aspect, producing crops, selling them, using the crops to make conserves or sauces or lavenders to do cosmetics or liqueurs, anything. There's so much potential.
We've spent about 8 years of our life in Caerphilly. My daughter's kind of grown up here. She's been a toddler, and I've seen her grow up into a lovely little girl. And speaking about Ruperra Castle, I think it's one of those. I've been associated with the Ruperra Castle on their with the trust in their events previously, but just getting to know about the history of the castle and the role it played. As part of the World War, the soldiers that were being based there. I think for me it's always been something. I've been so grateful to be involved in this because it's a part of history that I think needs a lot of preservation. It's something to be so proud of as being part of Wales in Caerphilly, and something that future generations definitely need this kind of history to be maintained, to know that this is where it all happened. So I think more that, it's definitely a pleasure, but even so, I'm hugely grateful to be part of this whole, event, in terms of doing whatsoever that needs to be done to preserve, the castle.
I'm always looking for an interesting walk. Looking at the maps, noticed this place and saw the castle, and decided, let's go and have a look. One of the biggest things about Scouts is obviously like orienteering, so understanding the maps and knowing exactly where they need to be and where they need to go. So part of obviously Scouting is walking, hiking across the mountains. So they need to understand the weather, the terrain and different things of that nature. And around this neck of the woods is great for them to understand these things. And places for them to see then as well for historic interest is just fantastic. And we're lucky in Caerphilly because we've got loads of them. What interested me about Ruppera was the fact that they had no road access. How did they get things to it? And it's just little things like that we could try to interest the kids to see if they can come up with an understanding of what they used to do, to see how they would have built it. How did they bring these items to there, the stone and everything? We probably would try and look at getting a walk as one example for them to do, and then we would have a chat after about the castle, what they liked, what they didn't like, just to get their interest then as well, and it's trying to tick two boxes at the same time. Bit of local history plus understanding, walking, hiking in what we can class as mountains, and map reading at the same time.
My name's Esme, and only recently I found out about Ruperra Castle. Everyone knows about Caerphilly Castle behind me, but many fewer people know about the Ruperra Castle. It was built by the Morgan family of Tredegar House to show off their wealth and status in the early 1600s. Ruperra deserves to be a better known castle. I'm glad that I've learned about its history as I live in Caerphilly and it's quite close to me. And I will be going to study Welsh history in Aberystwyth, so it's nice to know about the local history.
There is a wonderful example of a castle that's almost identical and in fact may have been a pattern for Ruperra, and that's at Lulworth in Dorset. And that has been owned by the Weld family for 400 years. In a wonderful partnership they formed with English Heritage. A major restoration was made, because the most extraordinary thing about Lulworth and Ruperra is how similar their histories are. Built in the 1600s, burnt down in the late 1700s, and then burnt again in the 1940s. An extraordinary set of coincidences. And Lulworth now, which I visited last summer, is absolutely wonderful. Restored to the extent that the Weld family now can open it so that there's public access, but they also use it for functions, including weddings. And to see the layers of history up through the walls is quite spectacular in a big banqueting hall. And you can actually go up one of the towers, walk up on a staircase that's been inserted, and see across the English Channel. So the parallels with Ruperra are really striking. And it would be wonderful if we thought that some sustainable way of ensuring that people can visit at least at some point in the year. It wouldn't need to be open all of the time. But before that could happen, something needs to be done to secure the building. In terms of its history, it was burnt out in 1941, and apart from one attempt at repair, it has not been touched since. So these are unsupported brick walls which really are very fragile now and in a very dangerous condition. That is something that we've learnt from surveys that have taken place of the building. It's been in a succession of different ownerships, and different owners have wanted different things from it. But I think what we as a trust would like is there to be some shared vision for a future for the castle, which focuses on three main elements really. A repair of the castle itself. It's in very dangerous condition now. Nobody can access it, and that's important because it is a dangerous site. And yet, with careful use of funds that are available, including, for example, National Lottery Heritage Fund, which is accessible to a trust such as ourselves, then it could be possible to effect repairs so that it stabilises. And then there's the setting. I've talked about the wonderful landscape setting, and that's a unique golden triangle, green triangle between Caerphilly and the cities of Newport and Cardiff. It's packed with history, the whole area, and it deserves protection. We would like to see a green belt. We would like to see Ruperra Castle becoming the focus of a heritage-led country park. And our vision is to include local people and communities in that, so that it provides opportunities for skill development, for training, and as well as hopefully for people to come and enjoy its beauty. So that's the second element, and that third element is really ensuring the sustainability. And sustainable access is very much a part of that. The last thing one would want to do is attract people in lots of cars and lots of activity, because the other unique part of the site is the fact that it's a site of special scientific interest, SSSI. And it is that because it is so special in terms of protected species, and those include bats, and particularly greater horseshoe bats. There's the only maternal colony of the greater horseshoe bat in South Wales, so just the one that's in one of the outbuildings. And it is so important, particularly at night time, that those animals are allowed to have free rein to use the woodland and the natural environment that has been regenerated on Coed Craig Ruperra, so that it becomes part of a very biodiverse and very important for the future of those species. So that element as well really adds an extra layer.
Was that not a wonderful tour? Thank you very much to all those who've made this possible. It was a really special occasion. I hope we can see you again on another occasion. Thank you very much for joining us.